Ontology of language. What is a concept? Part 2. Word ontology. All words resolve to either an object or a concept. All words can be grouped into two distinct categories by way of their resolved ontology, objects or concepts. But how do we accomplish this? Question. Since all words are first and foremost lexical concepts, how do we reference a rock in our sentences? Wouldn't the rock be a concept? Answer. No. This issue is resolved objectively by way of ontology. Opinion plays no role here. It is the ontology of the referent, i.e. that which a word refers to, which determines whether the word in question will be categorized as either an object or a concept. The word rock, in and of itself, is obviously a lexical concept. We already explained previously that atomic brain activity is the referent of any lexical concept, like concept or rock, i.e. the referent is a verb or process, i.e. a concept. That's why all words are concepts in and of themselves. And this is what our brain does when we parse a sentence from a syntactical point of view, as sentential syntax strictly deals with concepts. But we don't derive the meaning of words and sentences from syntax. Surely, there must be objects out there like rocks, planets, and stars, which are not just the petty linguistic syntax of our brain activity. These are objects which must have their own physical presence because they exist, right? Of course, in order to consistently resolve this issue, we need to consider such words in their proper context. This means that we must evaluate the referent of the word in question, i.e. rock, as this is what ultimately allows us to resolve its underlying ontological context. And this is exactly what we did previously when we evaluated the referent of the lexical concept as a process of atomic brain activity, i.e. a concept. But in our current case, the referent of the word rock does not resolve to a concept or a process of brain activity. It specifically resolves to a standalone object. Why? Because all objects have shape. This is the only objective criterion which can be consistently used to determine whether the referent of a word is either an object or a concept, i.e. a relation or process. When we evaluate the word in question, we ask, question, does the ontological context of its referent have a shape? If so, then the word in question resolves to an object, otherwise, it's a concept. Since a rock, i.e. referent, has a shape, then the word rock is placed in the category we call objects. Words in any language, even in God's language will, without question, fall in one of two categories, object or concept. There is no other option, ever. Why? Because the shape is the only objective, i.e. observer-independent, property that can be used to distinguish between objects and concepts by way of their ontology. There is no other property which is intrinsic to the object itself. Any other word you can imagine which doesn't fall in the category of object is a concept because concepts specifically refer to the process of brain activity, i.e. the state or phenomenon we call thought. Hence, concepts are not standalone entities in reality. The moon was an object with a shape before any being evolved to sense it and give an opinion on the issue. Hence the moon is a standalone entity independent of observers and their thoughts. Of course, there are those who will disagree, and I welcome them in the comments section. Linguistic grammars are context-sensitive, and it is this contextual grammar phase of language which elucidates the context and meaning of words from the ontological context of their referent. We use the ontological context of the referent to objectively resolve whether a word can be classified as either an object or a concept. Opinion or guessing plays no role here. Whether you realize it or not, you are mentally performing this contextual phase of grammar each time you read and parse a sentence. This is how you are able to place all words and phrases in their proper context and extract the intended meaning of a sentence. If the meaning is ambiguous or not what the author intended, then it's the author's job to remedy these issues and convey the meaning he originally intended. This is not the job of the audience, right? Evaluating the ontological context of the reference is the only objective method by which the author can guarantee his sentences to be free from ambiguities of ontology. In the following section, we will explore the construct of contextual grammar with an example and explain how to avoid the pitfall of the fallacy of reification. Fallacy of reification, converting concepts into objects. Most of the confusion we have with words revolves around maintaining the proper context of our concepts when ascribing meaning to a sentence. Some are oblivious to this phase of contextual grammar when ascribing verbs to syntactical nouns that are pure concepts. They sometimes unwittingly convert a concept to an object, thus making the sentence irrational. Since we use concepts to extract meaning within the scope of a sentence, we must be prudent of contextual consistency to avoid this common pitfall of language, fallacy of reification. Those who fall victim to this fallacy don't understand the difference between a noun of syntactical grammar and a noun of contextual grammar. The difference may not only be huge, but also fatal to your sentences. Reification is the irrational conversion of a concept into an object. For example, the conversion of the concept of love into an alleged entity which can move mountains is irrational and most certainly impossible. Consider the following sentence: after the contractor received his payment, his obligation flew out the window. In syntactical grammar, the word obligation is a noun of syntax only. As a noun of syntax, it is a concept because the syntactical correctness phase of grammar deals exclusively with concepts. There is no contextual resolution here. In contextual grammar, the word obligation does not convey the meaning of a noun. It conveys the meaning of a verb, i.e. the course of action to which the contractor is legally bound to. This means that obligation can no longer be treated as a noun, as we are past the syntactical correctness phase. In the final, contextual phase of grammar, obligation explicitly refers to an action, i.e. concept, which must be performed by the contractor. This is what is expected of the contractor, in reality, his course of action. There is no noun of reality called obligation which literally emanates from the contractor and flies out the window, right? The above sentence is using ordinary speech to figuratively tell us that after the contractor was paid, he ceased to abide by his obligation, i.e. verb. This sentence cannot be taken literally because it applies the verb, flew, to the concept, obligation. Concepts don't fly like birds. In fact, concepts do not exist, so you cannot ascribe motion to them as it doesn't make sense. The sentence is not telling us that the syntactical noun obligation magically transformed, i.e. reification, into a noun of reality, i.e. object, and literally flew out the window like a bird flies out the window. During the contextual grammar phase, the ontological context of the referent of the word obligation resolves to a concept, not an object. Nobody in their right mind would convert the concept obligation to an object, noun of reality, and ascribe motion to it. Obviously, sentences which literally ascribe motion to concepts are irrational. But there are people out there making these hasty mistakes without even realizing it because they don't understand the object versus concept ontology of the referent. The point of all this is to prevent our sentences from erroneously introducing magical spirits, i.e. concepts, into reality when it is impossible for them to be there. Reality, i.e. existence, is comprised of objects which exist. In contextual grammar, they are known as the nouns of reality. All the nouns of reality are unequivocally objects. Objects are the mediators which perform actions unto other objects, i.e. the bulldozer moved the mountain, objects, bulldozer, mountain, concept, moved. The concept love cannot move a mountain. There are no concepts in reality. Concepts do not exist. Not even God Almighty can make them exist, much less a sentence which ascribes motion to them. What is an abstract concept? An abstract concept is a higher-order concept which encompasses an underlying relation of objects and concepts in perhaps a nested, hierarchical, or other types of predefined association. Question: why do we need such complexities as abstract concepts? Answer: because they are useful for invoking ideas such as categories, hierarchies, links, sets, schemas, axioms, etc. for the purposes of generalizing, establishing complex relationships, and solving problems in tautological domains. They are widely used in applications such as organizational type disciplines, mathematics, logic, technology, medicine, engineering, computer science, etc. Abstraction is a method of expanding a being's intelligence by reducing the number of entities the being needs to associate and memorize in order to convey more complex ideas and meanings. It is essentially a systematic means to an unlimited integration of cognitive data into our memory. By implementing abstract concepts, we can represent condensations of knowledge and understanding. They facilitate quicker understanding by reducing cognitive labor through the process of abstraction. As stated previously, our thoughts and our words are the product of our environment. But they can also be the product of abstract concepts, like the many tautologies that we invent. For example, we invented the concept infer to be used in the context of abstract concepts such as logic and mathematics. In this case, the concept infer relates a set of premises, an abstract concept, to a person, object, who performs the action of inferring, verb/concept, a conclusion, an abstract concept. As another example, we can conceive of the abstract concept called musical instrument, which relates the concepts wind instrument, flute, trumpet, and string instrument, guitar, violin, each of which is a relation between the specified objects. How do intelligent beings use concepts to develop language? All intelligent beings in the universe invent their language directly from the bounty of their natural environment. As we explained earlier, any grunt, sign language, smoke signal, or word they utter will necessarily associate at least two objects from their environment. Only objects exist in the universe, because only objects can possibly have a physical presence. Whenever intelligent beings evolve in the universe and become more sophisticated, i.e. begin to communicate ideas to each other, they develop languages. How do they go about doing this? In two simple steps. They first look at all the objects in nature, point to them, and utter a word to name them. Remember, this is exactly how it was done in biblical times when God brought the animals before Adam, who pointed at each animal and gave it a name for the record. Genesis 2 verses 19 to 20. Now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds in the sky. He brought them to the man to see what he would name them, and whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. Looks like God is a rational guy. I mean, even God realizes that objects can only be named, not defined. Yep, the old man knows that it is impossible to define an object because it is a standalone entity, it has no meaning in and of itself. Those who disagree will have to explain how objects have otherwise acquired intrinsic self-meanings. Was it from God? These folks are unwittingly making the same argument that Banana Man Ray Comfort made. God made the banana with meaning for us, i.e. to conveniently fit into our hand and into our mouth. It even has a protective wrapper to keep it fresh. Question. So where do we get meaning from? What is it exactly that gives meaning to words if not individual objects? Answer. A word has no meaning other than that of the concept it symbolizes, whose meaning consists of the associations we establish with objects. Standalone entities have no way of giving meaning to the words which reference them. Words like rock resolve to a referent, which explicitly has the ontology of a standalone object. Meaning is only obtained by associating at least two objects in a relation that is defined for its applicability to some purposeful utility. After we name the entities of our environment, we have a collection of objects that can be used as reference in our sentences. For example, in the sentence "the ball fell to the floor," the words ball and floor are reference to objects in our environment. Furthermore, these objects of our environment are also used in associations which explicitly define and provide some intended meaning, like a type of motion. In the above example, the word fell is a dynamic concept which describes and gives meaning to the relation between two objects, specifically, the motion between the ball and the floor. It is impossible to define the word fell without associating at least two objects. For example, you cannot define fell by simply referencing the ball by itself, without any other relation. You cannot even imagine a lone ball falling in a universe that is comprised of a single lonely ball. Even the dynamic concepts of energy, mass, time, field, or force cannot even be imagined or conceptualized on a lonely object. Not even God Almighty can conceptualize them. Now you should be able to understand exactly why energy, mass, time, field, and force do not exist, they never have, and they never will. It is atheists and mathematicians who believe these words to represent incorporeal entities akin to invisible spirits. Why? Because they don't understand the difference between an object and a concept. During our initial conception of these associations between the objects in question, we can easily visualize how we link objects and how they relate to each other as a whole, in order to provide the intended meaning to our concept. This is how each and every concept is conceived and defined. There are no exceptions. Learning to speak does not consist of memorizing sounds. This is what a parrot learns to speak, just sounds. Learning consists of grasping meanings by associating the reference of words, i.e., the objects that words denote in reality. This is how we understand words and learn their proper usage in sentences. And that's how we built languages and other systems of thought, like mathematics, logic, the legal system, governments, societies, etc. All words from every language are concepts, i.e., relations between two or more objects. For example, husband and wife are concepts, relations between two humans, like Adam and Eve. Running is a concept, a relation between the legs of a living being and the ground. We invent new concepts every single day because of our necessity to evolve our society, education, technology, etc. Without question, this is exactly what any intelligent species does. They invent new concepts, define them unambiguously, and apply them toward the communication of new ideas or for solving problems in some domain of utility. Note, meaning is what we explicitly define in the relation within each concept. Concepts don't magically self-acquire meaning, nor are they devoid of meaning, despite what some people will have you believe. Concepts are the underlying basis of our intelligence. It is inescapable. You cannot understand or communicate anything without first performing the following 3 steps. Conceiving of concepts. Understanding their definition and what they associate. Understanding how to apply them in their proper context. This is the underlying basis of our intelligence, concepts. Without objects, and without associations between them, we have no concepts, and no words. This means that the concept is our fundamental unit of intelligence. And indeed, you will find that this is exactly what an IQ test measures and scores you on, how many concepts you understand well enough to utilize in solving problems within a given time. That is all there is to an IQ test. There is no magic, mysticism, or prestige. Are you not satisfied with your IQ score of 100? No problem, just study up on your concepts, practice solving problems, and you can score 190 plus if you are so inclined. There are no God-gifted geniuses or super-intelligent beings out there. What is an object? People often use the word object without having a clue what it means. Physics is the study of objects, real objects, which are said to exist. Physics does not study something which cannot possibly exist. But mathematicians haven't a clue what an object is because they can't even define the term. So how can they possibly be doing physics? Mathematics has nothing to do with physics. The so-called mathematical physicists are not doing physics, they are doing math, because math is the study of concepts, not the study of objects. Object. That which has shape. It's that simple. All objects have shape, whether they are abstract objects whose shape is dependent on an observer's conception, or real objects whose shape is a standalone property and observer-independent. Reality is comprised of objects. All objects can be illustrated whether they are invisible or not. The invisible objects which mediate the phenomena we call light, gravity and magnetism can certainly be hypothesized. The hypothesis stage of the scientific method is used to illustrate all the objects which will be used as actors to explain how they mediate natural phenomena. This explanation is the theory stage of the scientific method. Light, gravity, magnetism and electricity are all mediated by objects. You simply cannot conceptualize motion without an object being present. Matterless motion is impossible. Anyone talking about dynamic phenomena, like electricity or magnetism, had better have some hypothesized object moving and mediating these phenomena. Now, the entities mediating these phenomena may be invisible to us humans because our sensory system does not have the bandwidth or sensitivity to be stimulated by the whole light spectrum. But this doesn't mean that there isn't something, i.e. object, out there performing these actions. Otherwise, you are talking about the motion of nothing, which implies that nothing is performing actions which mediate phenomena. This is clearly impossible. The universe can only be described as the relation of something, matter, to nothing, space. There is no other option besides something versus nothing. The nouns of reality are necessarily objects which are said to exist. This means that the subject of your discussion had better be a noun of reality if you want to give it the capability to move and interact with other objects. The nouns of grammar like love and bravery are not objects. They have no shape/form. They cannot possibly have a surface or physical presence. Thus, they cannot possibly be real and exist in reality. Such nouns of grammar are concepts. All concepts are relations which are necessarily predicated on existing objects. Without objects, you cannot even conceive of any concept. Humans identify reality's binary system with the labels of object and concept. These are the only two options which any sentient being can conceptualize to correspond to reality. There is no other option besides something, object, versus nothing, concept. Conclusion. Concepts are your friends, so be nice to them. If you use them as key terms in your arguments, do them justice and unambiguously define them. Don't wait for a member of the audience to showcase your contradictions and ridicule you. This is the only way you can demonstrate to the audience that you are smart enough to understand your own argument. Otherwise, you have committed the fallacy of equivocation. Don't ascribe verbs to objects, otherwise, you have committed the fallacy of reification. Ensure that you always resolve the ontological context of the referent. It goes without saying that nobody can argue against the importance of consistency in concepts, definitions, semantics, grammar, and contextual meaning. Those who disagree are declaring war against language, human understanding, and rationality. But they are welcomed wholeheartedly to post in the comment section a rational justification for their position. If they cannot justify their venom, then they are merely protesting against rationality because it destroys their religion.